Please do, Dr. Brown.
Okay,
take it away. Take it away.
I thank you all for coming back so promptly after lunch, and look forward to some discussion around the issue of academic integrity. So, why are we talking about this? Social work students must follow college, university, and professional guidelines related to academic integrity and honesty. Let's see here. I think I did it. I'm pretty low. Which might lead you to fail a class. You will probably get a lower GPA overall. It might stop you from graduating. It will be reported to the university. It may lead to termination from the college and or the university. And as social workers, we are held to a code of ethics. So it is your responsibility to be fully informed as to what constitutes plagiarism and to refrain from all activities, that constitute plagiarism. So if you have any questions at all during my presentation, after my presentation, Dr. Andrews is going to be talking to you about writing next, and that also will kind of piggyback on this issue. Please consult your instructors. You want to err on the side of caution. We want you to succeed. And if you have any questions at all about whether or not what you're going to do can be considered plagiarism, please just talk to us and let us know, and we will let you know. Ignorance of the law is no excuse. I personally have had unfortunately too many students in my office who I caught being academically dishonest, who pled not to know, or did it by accident, or did it by mistake. And that is not an excuse, particularly when it's laid out in your syllabi and in your policies and procedures. So as a student here at the College of Social Work at the University of South Carolina, you need to obey these laws for a couple different reasons. One, the University of Carolina says that you need to have academic integrity. So there's a Carolinian Creed. You are all now Carolinians. And it does state that you will practice personal and academic integrity. It says that this commitment should eliminate the practice of plagiarism or borrowing another student's work, lying, deceit, and excuse making. So why is this so important? It's also very important because as social workers, we have to adhere to a code of ethics that says that social workers should not participate in, condone, or be associated with dishonesty, fraud, or deception. So one of the values in that code of ethics is based on integrity and that social workers will behave in a trustworthy manner. So I'm sure that you're all sitting there thinking, this doesn't apply to you, and of course you have integrity, and you would never commit plagiarism. I'm certain that some of those students in my office were lying to me, but I will tell you right now, they all felt really bad, and were in a position that they didn't think it could happen to them either. There's some mistakes that can be made that actually equal academic dishonesty. We'll be talking about this, and this is why you need to be careful. When we're talking about plagiarism, we're talking about academic dishonesty. That means using anyone else's work, with or without permission, and putting it in your paper and representing it as your own. And that's basically what you're doing when you're copying and pasting from something that somebody else wrote, putting it in your paper, and not referencing it. You are basically declaring it your own.
We planned this to demonstrate that social workers are flexible and that we solve problems.
And loud. So this includes, and these are all examples that have happened to myself or my colleagues, sharing papers with your friends who are in other sections of your class, whether it be a small sharing or a large sharing, and handing them in. Copying and pasting again, anything without citing it is considered academic dishonesty. If you improperly cite your sources, that is academic dishonesty. And if you use any direct quotes without quotation marks and the page numbers, that is considered academic dishonesty. So it's not as cut and dry. This is, I don't want to say it's a slippery slope, but it's a challenging slope to learn to write at a graduate level. And this is a really important premise to make sure that you incorporate in this writing. So if you look on the website, that's kind of small, I know, and again, hopefully these PowerPoints will be available to everyone afterwards. The university also gives examples of this. So if you receive any unauthorized assistance or give such assistance, that is considered academic dishonesty. So there are some more specifics there, and like I said, in every one of your syllabi from your instructors, you should have your instructor's specific academic honesty policy. So, we all love the internet. Nobody loves the internet more than I do. However, when it comes to writing your papers, and when I'm saying papers, I mean your major papers for your classes, group projects, anything that you hand in or submit that is written is what I'm talking about. So the internet is fantastic. It's fantastic to look for sources for your papers and your projects. It is incredibly wonderful to get electronic versions of all those articles. Got this big stack of books here. In my not so long life, just not even in my master's program, in my doctorate program, I was doing most of my literature review before the explosion of electronic journals. So I schlepped to the library and had piles and piles and piles of books that I would then take to the copy machine. That has largely been eliminated from your life's experience. So the internet is a fantastic thing to help you with your scholarship and your professional activities. However, copying and pasting, it should never happen ever, ever, ever. There's no reason to ever copy and paste anything into anything that you hand in for a project for a class or for your professional life. There may be instances, and we'll get into some examples, where you're going to directly quote something. So that might be an exception, but you really want to be careful here. Because I've seen, time and time again, people either from an internet source, so say you're doing a paper on muscular dystrophy, and you go to a muscular dystrophy website, and you just copy and paste that, because that sounds like a good introduction to what muscular dystrophy is, and you just throw it in a paper. Or if you copy and paste from journal articles, or if you copy and paste from magical papers that you can find online at magical websites that have pretty much a paper on every topic you can think of. You can find a paper on it online. Now, I will tell you, we will catch you doing that, but you can find it out there. There are websites. You don't even have to pay for them anymore. It used to be that you used to have to pay for papers on subjects. Nowadays, you can pretty much get a paper on anything you can imagine for free on the internet from somewhere. So it's tempting to just copy and paste that, but that is exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about academic dishonesty. So neither is Wikipedia. I did notice that Dr. Andrews has on her outline, she's talking about Wikipedia also. When you're doing a paper or a project on a subject, going to Wikipedia or something like Wikipedia, where it's just a compilation of facts online, does not constitute a literature review. And copying and pasting from Wikipedia into your paper is academic dishonesty. So you want to be very careful with that. And again, neither is any website where you can purchase or get for free a paper on your topic. So you just want to be really careful that you don't copy and paste anything from the internet or anywhere else and put it in your paper without proper citation. Now there is a way to do this correctly. And you also want to be careful that you're always using your own words. What we want from you as students and what we want from you as colleagues and social workers is your own ideas. We want to know what you think of the subject on which you're writing something. So using other people's information, you want to use your own words and your own thoughts and your own critical thinking. That's what we want. We don't want you to tell us what somebody else said. So I've got a couple examples here for you on what it is that I'm talking about, because it kind of sounds impossible that you should never use other sources. And that's not true. You just want to make sure you use them correctly. So these are examples actually from a paper that I co-authored with one of our doctoral students, Tamara Savage. So, and I'll go into the details of both. But you can see, and again, for those of you who are either a little bit away from the academic experience and haven't been writing a lot and reading a lot, writing at a graduate level is very different. So it is going to take you a little while. So you can see this first sentence here has a citation at the end, and so does this one here. So we'll look at the details here. So here the sentence is, end-stage renal disease is a chronic illness that currently affects 571,000 people in the United States. So, when you use facts that don't only come from your own head, you need to say where you got those facts from. Like, I don't wake up in the morning and know how many people have end-stage renal disease. That comes from somewhere else, and I need to make sure that I cite where that comes from. So anytime you use facts and figures, you need to cite the source of that information. And then you need to be sure to include a citation and where you got that information from. So that information comes from the USRDS data system. But again, you need to make sure you use 100% of your own words to explain this fact. Now, if I went to the USRDS website, which is where that information comes from, I know that in their own writing, they have this fact written differently. I can't just go copy-paste and put it in my paper. I need to put it in my own words. So likewise, here's a sentence, not necessarily with facts and figures, but before or prior to federal government intervention in 1972, hemodialysis was viewed as experimental and funded primarily for donations and the private funds of patients. So we got this information from two sources, so we cite both sources. We did not directly quote anything, so you don't see any quotation marks there. So the fact that we got these facts from somewhere else means that we have to cite them. And you might notice, this brown 2012, that's actually me. So even though that's something I wrote before, I wrote it before and published it somewhere else, so I still need to cite myself. So you need to be very careful about citations. Even if you yourself wrote something else and published it, you need to cite yourself because you no longer are the original source of that information. So here's an example of working with direct quotes. So the direct quote here says, lawyer, a minister, a banker, a housewife, an official of state government, a labor leader, and a surgeon. So we use that direct quote from this source. So what you have to do, you have to make sure you put that in quotation marks, and you have to make sure you cite it, and include the page number. This usually is where students get tripped up. If this did not have quotation marks, and this did not have a page number, technically that's academic dishonesty. Technically that's plagiarism. Because you're representing something that somebody else wrote as your own. So this usually is where you want to be careful. And I'm sure Dr. Andrews, as she speaks about writing, will get into this in more depth, but you really want to stay away from direct quotation whenever possible. You want to use your own words and not tell us what somebody else is saying. So again, with direct quotes, you need to put it in quotation marks and put a page number. And if you don't, that's academic dishonesty. So what your best friend will be the APA style for writing. That's from the American Psychological Association. It is the most commonly accepted style for writing and publishing in social work, and probably the one that every one of your instructors is going to ask you for. That is a citation style, and part of that book talks in really great depth about how to properly cite things. You can get it pretty cheap, like on Amazon or any used book sale. So I strongly encourage you, particularly if you are not an expert at academic writing, and even those of us who are, I mean, literally mine is right on my desk, because there's always something that throws me. So that will tell you exactly how to correctly cite sources. So you want to just be very careful. So you want to make sure that you are uniquely writing a paper for the class that you're in, not just recycling things that you've used in other classes, unless your instructor explicitly tells you you can do it. It should be substantially different, and you should make sure that you are aware and understand your instructor's academic honesty policy. It'll be in their syllabus. Each one of ours is a little different. Now, one thing you should be very careful about is that all instructors can and may be using some software that can tell us definitively if what you give us is original content or unoriginal content. There's a software called SafeSign, and when we run your papers or anything written through there, it will tell us the percentage of your paper that is original, the percentage that is unoriginal. It will show us the exact website or source where you got that information from. So it's pretty easy for us to show you exactly why we're having an issue with something that you handed in to us. So it does analyze every paper that's ever been submitted to them also, so that includes your classmates, that includes yourself. So you can't just take one paper that you write your fall semester and recycle that every semester with different professors. That's probably not going to let you get away with it. So that comes up with an analysis about the percentage of original content in your paper. So it does compare it to everything on the internet. I mean, I've seen reports of some really obscure and hard to find. I would never on my own find sources that this finds and tells me and shows me, it doesn't even tell me, it shows me exactly where the student got this information from. And I can go word by word by word to see if it matches what the student did. So I know that you copied and pasted. What's that?
Is that available to us, you know, for one of us contact that right for us to go ahead and look through our papers that way we don't have it there, you know, we don't know.
Okay, the question was if Save Assign is available to students for you to analyze your own papers. And quite frankly, the answer is I'm not quite sure if the university does make it available to you as a student. If you do not copy and paste from anywhere, you shouldn't have any problem at all. Okay, Save Assign, sorry, let me clarify. Save Assign does not tell me as an instructor if you're citing correctly. It just tells me if you are using original content. Save Assign actually won't tell me if you're properly using APA. I need to do that with my own eyes. So yeah, sorry, I must not have been clear about that. This will only tell me if you're copying and pasting from somewhere else, other than your paper you're handing in. So sorry about the confusion with that. All instructors, I don't want to speak for every one of my colleagues, would be very happy if you're struggling with academic writing. There's some resources. First of all, your individual instructor, and Dr. Andrews is going to get into this more. Your individual instructor, we've got some writing resources at the college or the university, and we really do want you to succeed. So we are here to help you grow and to become an ethical social worker, and we really do want you to succeed. So we know that there's challenges in that. We just want you to make sure that you know what to do when it comes to writing, and that's why we've kind of added this section to orientation. Dr. Andrews is going to go into more detail about the complexities of graduate level writing. Are there any more questions about academic honesty, though, and integrity? Great. Thank you all. I wish you much success, and Dr. Andrews is going to be chatting about reading and writing. Arlene, do you have a PowerPoint? I'm going to leave this over.
Well, Dr. Andrews is getting ready. I want to reiterate what Dr. Brown said to you. It doesn't happen often, but it is heartbreaking to have a conversation with a student. This is what I didn't know. And then we have to plumb the depths of the heart of a student. I mean, it really is heartbreaking. And in most cases, in most classes, you know, you get 0 for the assignment and possibly fail the course. So if you have even the slightest doubt or a half a doubt, please ask. Okay? We truly that's what we're here for. But it's a heartbreaking. Dr. Andrews is going to testify to this.
It is, unfortunately. And I'm glad to be here. Are you all tired of sitting in those seats? Yes. I know. I'm so sorry. And you've got 2 more days of it. What can I say? I can only imagine the pain and the agony. And I wish I could say, you know, let's get up and dance around the room for a bit. We will do a little bit of experiential things during the session, but what I've been asked to do are to cover some things. I know a lot of this has been about, you know, how to get into the University of South Carolina, you know, making sure everything's smooth, what to expect, what to do. What I'm going to be talking to you about is how to get out of here and get a degree and pass your licensure exam, because we're going to be talking about some lifelong learning skills that are inherent in our graduate program. And I know some of you may already have other graduate degrees, but for many of you, this is going to be your first experience doing graduate level work. It is qualitatively quite different than undergraduate work. And I don't mean just that there's more of it. I mean, it's qualitatively a different kind of an experience. I'm not going to teach you how to do that today. I couldn't begin to do that. I am going to give you an overview of what some of the things are that you should expect. And so the focus that we have today is on how to read. I'm assuming that you all learned that, hopefully at some very young age. But we're going to be talking about how to critically read as a scholar, as someone who's interested in research evidence and the other kind of advanced professional information that can tell you whether an intervention works or not, so that you're not just doing some new fad about how to help somebody, but you're really looking at things that could make a difference and make real change. Let me see if I know how to work this. Do you know where I aim this to make it advance? Carrie was just doing it, so I know it's. Do you know what I aim this at? Do it this way.
We need someone who's about 17 years old.
I don't need to have my back to the front row. So the purposes of this session are to increase your understanding of the importance of critical reading and thinking, critical thinking, as a foundation for professional social work practice, to increase your knowledge about resources that are available, particularly to support your writing skills. Now, we talk a lot about writing, but we're really talking about communication skills. You're going to be doing a lot of presentations. But social work is, by definition, a social profession. It's all about communication. It's all about interaction. And writing is one way that we express ourselves. And generally, if you're a good writer, you're good at communicating in other ways as well. Now, what is a professional? Well, you're here to become a professional, right? I mean, you're not here to study sociology. You're not looking at, neuroscience. You're entering a profession. And what does that mean? If you were entering medical school, you'd be entering a profession, law school, but you're in social work school. It involves some kind of lifelong, so that there's a sort of a career orientation. How's a profession different from a job, or professional different from someone who's a worker?
They adhere to a code of ethics within their own group.
They adhere to a code of ethics, so there's some standards of behavior expected within their own group. There's a group identity. Do you have a BSW? A lot of my BSW students always know the answers to this. What are other hallmarks? Yes. Yes, in many cases they are licensed. There's some certification that's been, there's a verification that they can hold themselves out to the public. Basically, a professional is someone that offers to do something for the public. And there are several characteristics of a profession, so I'll go over what that is. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. The characteristics of a profession or professional are there is a specialized body of knowledge. And in your case, in our case, we start out with foundation like human behavior in the social environment. You learn something about research. You learn about certain foundational skills. And then you learn advanced kinds of skills. So there's skills and competencies that you have shown that you have mastered. You're called a master for a reason. And you're going to be expected at many different points along the way to show that you have mastered certain competencies. You do have this group identity. In our case, many of us affiliate like with the National Association of Social Workers, but for the most part, you cannot call yourself a social worker unless you have a license, that you have an identity as to what that means. And there are these standards of behavior and practice, the Code of Ethics being our ethical set of standards, but we also have standards for different forms of practice. And they're becoming more and more standards, for instance, for gerontological practice, for other kinds of specialized practice. Next slide. So professional knowledge, skills, and standards evolve over time, but any professional has to engage in lifelong learning. You can't just get your degree and then stop learning. You have to constantly verify that you've been up to date because things change. Practices change. And so professional learning starts now. And some of what I'm going to be going over with you are some of the core skills that are required that are a part of lifelong learning. Next slide, please. So today we'll focus on reading, critical thinking, and writing. Next slide, please. And we'll start with a reading exercise. You all have received two handouts. One is a set of websites that I'm going to refer to later that hopefully will be useful to you. And the other is, and I'm sorry it's kind of dark and harder to read. I have difficulty reading those kinds of things myself, but that's the way it came out, and I kind of liked it. It's a recent article from Social Work about a topic that ought to interest you, but if you'll notice, all the topic was the very first page and one of the last pages, because I'm just using it for an example today. But what I want you to do while I take a minute to load up some websites is to read the front page of this article and ask yourself these questions, because you should be asking yourself these kinds of questions. These are critical reading questions. Ask yourself these kinds of questions every time you read something. Don't just read something because, oh, Dr. Barber said I had to read this. Read it because you might learn something from it, and critically review it over and over. Even if you read it for Dr. Farber's class or my class or whatever, it's going to come back to you when you take the licensure exam. And that's not to say that we teach only for licensure, but it's going to come back to you perhaps in a job interview that you have, and someone asks you, what do you know about such and such a theory, because it underlies their approach of their agency, the way they do things. And for you to be able to speak with some degree of intelligence about that theory is going to be very impressive, and may make the difference between whether you get the job or someone else does. So there's a lot of real pragmatic reasons to do these things, but for the most part, we're hoping you do it just because you're intellectually curious and you want to be a really good social worker. So as you read this page, please ask yourself, what did you learn? What else do you want to know? Differentiate what is fact and what is opinion. What supports the writers give for their facts, and what questions you might want to bring to class about what you read. So take a minute to read that page. The questions are going to go down for a minute because I need to use the web. And then when you finish reading it, turn to the person next to you and discuss some of these questions. It'll take about 7 or 8 minutes to do this. Okay, so we'll just give one example of a response to each question. What did you learn from this passage? Anybody? Yes? Okay, so we're moving towards measuring empathy, because empathy's long been a social work practice, but there's some new ways of looking at it. So you learn that they're going to try to measure it differently. After reading this, what else did you want to know? How they're going to measure it. Anything else? Yes?
What population will come out of that measurement to get a better, well, I can get a better understanding of their research.
So you want to be able to look more critically at how they actually have studied empathy and what population specifically they studied with it. So you want to know more about it. And one way to do that would be to read some of the people who are listed on the reference list, which is a very common way of writing a research paper. Yes? Other comments? Yes?
I want to know if there are any outliers, because they made the argument, or just going back and forth, that some people would do innate and you couldn't control it, and then other people are it's just being in your environment. So I wanted to know if there are any outliers, people who did not display any empathy as how they defined it.
So it raises a lot more questions for you that you want to, in terms of what's innate, and the classical question, free will and determinism. To what extent are things determined innately, and to what extent can people exercise some choice and change as they evolve? So, did anybody want to know what was in table 1? Because I didn't copy that for you. Okay, we're going to talk in a minute about how to find that out. And how did you differentiate their facts from their opinions? Their citations, which was the way they supported what they said, in terms of that this person found this or that. It's a fact that Barker gave a definition to empathy, but that definition may have somehow been Barker's opinion, right? I mean, you might have a different definition of empathy. And there's a sort of gray blend between what's fact and opinion. Some things are clearly fact. Much is opinion, though. And a lot of opinion is held out to be fact. So being able to differentiate what's a fact from an opinion is really important. It's getting harder and harder the way public media is these days, but a professional absolutely has to know how to do that. What supports do the writers give for their facts? They've got lots of references. We're going to come back to that when we talk about APA style. So what questions might you bring to class to share with your colleagues as you're further exploring this idea of empathy? Anybody get that part? Yes.
Maybe a few research has been done, because I think the last research was 2008.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe it's like more research has been done on the subject and how it's progressed and stuff, articles.
Very good, good point. The last article she saw was based in 2008. This was published in 2011. So there may be some newer things that have come out. And that might be something that you could do for your own research paper too, or you could ask your colleagues in your class if they've heard of anything that's out since then. Well, we could go on and on about this, but the point is, these are the kinds of questions you want to be thinking about every time you read something. There are other questions too, and you always want to be thinking about, how can I enhance my class? You're putting a lot into your graduate education, and we do classroom-based classes for a reason, because we are social workers and the social interaction is very important. So make the most of that time. Come prepared, come and ask stimulating questions of your colleagues, or make stimulating comments. It'll make the time go by much more productively. So let's assume we do want to know more about empathy. And in particular, we want to know what's on table 1, which is this chart about, these signature ingredients of empathy. How might we do that? So I don't know how many of you went to the University of South Carolina. So hopefully you already know how to do what I'm about to show. Sorry to duplicate it, but I'm going to try, my computer's working properly, to show you how to find this article at the library. Now, as far as I know, this works, wait a minute. This works best if you're on the university library. You have free access, because you're paying tuition, to an enormous amount of information on the internet, access that you cannot get from your own private computer, because our link is through fees that the university libraries pay. So if you go into the university libraries, and you're going to learn more about this as you go through your, you'll go through a library orientation, to the Thomas Cooper Library. And then you're going to want to look for articles and journals, because you want to look up this article. And choose a database. There is social work abstracts. I personally prefer PsycInfo. Anybody familiar with PsycInfo? Psych here? Yeah. PsycInfo has a lot more breadth. It covers law, government, all kinds of things. So we're going to look for this article in PsycInfo. But if you see, you're going to see all these vast numbers of databases you can choose from, many of which are related to social work. So we go into PsycInfo. Oh dear. Do I have to log on, David? I don't get from my own. Okay. It's a lot quicker in the computer lab. The problem I was having, David, is getting onto any sites that were not USC. So, okay, now we're in PsycInfo, and if we type the word social work, And empathy, whoops, sorry, thank you. And empathy, and we could also do it like author search, but this should work. See what we get. And we're going to get several things, but what we're looking for is this particular article. So we'll scroll down till hopefully we get it. And here it is. Is this it? That's by the same author about teaching empathy. There it is. And you can get the full text article. And for educational purposes, you can use it as you see fit. So as you can see, and there are going to be thousands of potential articles like this for you to get to. It's important to have this skill and to not use Google Scholar or internet searches blindly. I don't know where, do you know where the file would go? Usually the PDF would come right out. I think this computer may not be set up. It doesn't have a Adobe. Okay. Well, normally it would be right there for you. So sorry about that, because you'll just have to go for yourself and find Table 1 and see what else you can learn about the essential components of empathy. Okay. That was reading. Part of reading exercise number 1 is, first of all, read critically. Second of all, read the right sources. Read scholarly sources. And some more tips about reading critically is when you have an article to read, glance through it first, read all the headings, read the abstract, think about what it says. If it's a book, read through the chapters. Always read the preface and the introduction. The authors wrote the book for a reason and contextualized it in some way. It's very helpful. Read and think of it in terms of asking questions of the authors as you read. You then recite back, and what are the authors saying that might answer the questions I have about this? Like in the case of empathy, I might be asking, how does empathy relate to altruism? I've read a lot about altruism. How is empathy different from altruism? Or, they're talking about what neuroscientists are saying about empathy. I mean, social workers have been talking about empathy forever. What does empathy have to do with the brain? That's neuroscience. So I might want to learn some more about what brain doctors are saying about it. Anyway, so I might have lots of questions in that way and see what these authors have to say. Always make notes. Keep a constant journal. It's a good professional practice, whether you're going to be macro or micro. Lessons learned, you're constantly learning day by day. And so keep making notes about what you read and then review it. Do this and you'll be sure to master the material, and over time you'll find greater ease in mastering your skills. Could you put the next slide up, please? So, we've talked about reading, yes.
I have a question. For those of us that are distance learning, are we going to be able to get to access the library on our computers at home? I mean, how do we go about the articles?
Yeah.
David, I'm glad you're here.
VIP or?
There's a product you can check on our website called VPN that will actually let you VPN and get access to all the resources you can get on campus, off campus, anywhere. Just check out the website. If you want to send me some specific info, I'm doing a technology orientation tomorrow, and I'll give you my email address and everything. I can answer some of these questions tomorrow.
Yeah, there's definitely a way to do it, and you can get the access as long as you're registered at the University of South Carolina or if you're employed here. So what are the characteristics of a critical thinker? This is another one I want you to take a few minutes talking to someone who sits next to you in terms of what are the hallmarks of a critical thinker. We'll take 1 minute to do that. Come up with as many words as you can. Okay, time's up. And what did you decide are the hallmarks of a critical thinker? They're analytical. What do you mean by analytical? They can analyze facts. Okay, what does it mean to analyze facts? Look at things from a different perspective, break things down. Right, yes.
Thinking outside the box.
Thinking outside the box is another way of looking at critical thinking, yes. So it's thinking is more than just doing the thinking, but also knowing how to apply it, yeah? Being impartial. Possibly taking some risks. Tell us more about why critical thinking might be related to risk taking. That helps. So critical thinking could involve doing things that other people might not agree with or think are weird or crazy. So I'm looking at it critically. Well, if you'll give us the next slide, I just threw up some, along with a resource that I had available. But obviously being curious, doing creative questioning, asking why questions, seeking credible information, discerning main points. Discerning the main point is a really important critical thinking skill, and one that your professors are going to push you hard on. Dealing step by step, sticking to main points once they get to it, being open-minded, considering others' views, being willing to change, seeking precision, sensitive to others, and withholding judgment until evidence is clear. Another one probably would be to think before you speak, take a little bit of time. Before you say things, would be signs of critical thinking. So my goal today is not to teach you critical thinking, but to raise your mindfulness of what it means to be a critical thinker. Your professors will be working on these skills with you. Next slide, please. There are some steps that you can follow in doing critical thinking. For example, if we took this article on empathy and we were reading it to acquire knowledge, to better understand what social workers might want to know about what neuroscientists are saying about empathy, which is one of their main points, you would attend to the details and discern what are the main points. We didn't read the whole article, so we don't know what they all are. We would read for understanding, to try to relate this new information to what we already know about social work practice, or about empathic responding, or about other things like generosity or care, or some of the things that may be related to empathy. We would look at considering how to apply the new knowledge in practice. So if you read that article on empathy and you think about a client, let's say you're working in a direct micro practice setting and you've got a client who's been talking to you about the history they have thinking about suicide and the ways they thought about committing suicide, and you're thinking about how you responded to that. And it's hard to be empathic when you may feel alarmed or concerned or obligated to report, depending on what the circumstances are. And so you're thinking about, how did I show empathy for someone, who's in this really difficult spot? So you apply the knowledge, and maybe there's something in this article that would help you in some way. Next slide. You then analyze it, take it apart. But then you also synthesize it and put it all back together in a new way. Synthesis is a very important part of the critical thinking process, where you not only take things apart, but like when you're thinking about something like empathy, I can then relate it to other times that I, say, expressed empathy in some way, or been so distracted that I didn't express empathy, may have learned from a negative experience. And together, somehow I put it all together so that the next week when I see that same client, I have a new way of trying something. And so I synthesize what I've learned based on multiple sources of information, and then I apply it, and I evaluate it, and I think again about, so how did I do this week on my empathic expression? We, as professionals, are constantly looking at ourselves and how we do what we do. The tool we have as social workers, no matter what kind of practice we do, is our main tool is ourselves, and our main methods have to do with our social communications. So we're constantly working to improve them. And order to do that, we have to be good critical thinkers. Next. And when you put your thinking together with your reading, there's some sources here. And, I know David left, but these are the sources. I was going to try to tap you into some of these online sources. You do have a second handout. It's got the 6 slides in it. All the slides that I brought that have web links on them are on there. So I would encourage you to look at some of these slides. The first one is at University of California, Berkeley, put together a presentation on how to know if a source is scholarly. And it addresses things like problems with Wikipedia. Now, what do you think a problem with Wikipedia is? What's one sign of a really good source?
Peer review.
Peer review. But what's the number one sign?
Credible.
Well, it has an author. Wikipedia has no author. You don't know who wrote it.
And you can like click on a link, change it. It's like just like if something's wrong, just click on this link.
You can change it, yeah. And I use Wikipedia. I'm not saying, yeah, not for scholarly purposes. No. You know, if someone's talking about some musician I haven't heard of, I'll look them up. I'm like, oh, okay. And I know, though, that it may or may not be correct. But the number one thing you want is an author. And over time, you learn. You know, I work in the child abuse field. If Jim Barbarino writes something, I'm going to read it. He's really good. And he's got a framework I agree with. He does incredibly diligent research. And, you know, so if it's got his name on it, you know it's good. Now, that's not to say that every name, you're going to recognize every name you read. But credibility comes from peer reviews, people looking at someone else's work and saying that, you know, this is really accurate. So, these kinds of things are covered in the Berkeley present. It's a slideshow kind of thing you can put yourself through, and it'll tell you how to choose what's a good source and how to differentiate that from what's not a good source. And believe me, I get people, students who submit things all the time with some link to a website that has no author, and I'm like, you know, how can you even question somebody if you don't even know who wrote it? So. There's another one too at the St. Martin's. They also have a list of ways to assess sources. And then the USC research resources, that's a link to our own libraries. I went into PsycInfo, but there are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of different sources that you can use. So if you're doing a paper in the area of the military, there'll be links that get you into literature related to the social needs of people who have a military history, or gerontology, or child protection, prevention science, all kinds of links that you might be able to find in the USC libraries. Now, we've talked about reading, we've talked a bit about critical thinking. I wanted to spend some time on writing and expression and speaking as a social worker. Next. What I'd like you to do now is spend some time, and this time we're going to take more like 3 or 4 minutes. I want you to share the 3 ways that you learn to become a good writer. All of you were admitted to this program after writing some kind of statement. I'm hoping that you wrote major papers in college. I know we have some colleges who don't give you a college degree and don't expect you to do that. I'm sorry, but you'll learn it here, but it'll be a little bit harder. But all of us have learned to write. And I want you to share the 3 tips that you value most about how to become a good writer.
Are you talking about
Sure.
academically
Or creative writing?
Yeah.
Both. Any way that you consider yourself to be a good writer, how did you learn? So share with us some of the tips you have for how to become a good writer based on what you've learned. Let's hear a few of them. Yes?
One thing I learned is actually in high school, but if you have a paper, read it from bottom up, and you read it sentence by sentence the other way, and that'll help you cut down the sentence fragments because you can look at the sentence without reading it.
Okay, this is the paper you just drafted? Or, yeah. So if you're drafted a paper, before you turn it in, read it backwards. from the bottom up, because that will help you see if it really makes sense, and it will particularly help you detect sentence fragments and things that may be grammatically incorrect. Yes?
Read a lot.
Read a lot and use a thesaurus. And if I may, I would say read excellent writers a lot. I've actually never read a book by Stephen King, and horror is not my genre, but he had a great book called On Writing or something like that, and I did read it. I read books about writing, and basically it's his autobiography, and the man, as you know, has probably written 75 books. Well, he says he reads a book a week, and I thought, well, or a book and a half a week, and I'm like, that's like 80-some books a year, and he writes 1 or 2 books a year. How on earth does he get all that done? But he does. So anyway, he's a great writer. Yes, someone else? Yeah.
When I have a subject to write about, I normally just write it on paper. It can make absolutely no sense, but my brain is on fire, so I'm putting it on paper, I'm brainstorming. And then I start to review and make some sense of it. However, what you brought up,
All right, let me summarize your first point first. Brainstorm. Just get your ideas down on paper. Don't worry about the technicalities. Yeah, and then what you were going to say?
I've just never heard of reading my sentences backwards. I've never heard that before.
Okay, so she's affirming the read backwards. That sounds like a fun thing.
We both thought having somebody else read your work for you.
Absolutely.
Read your work, not being written, so don't pick up the thing. You were just filling it on your own.
Yeah. Peer review is absolutely entirely important. Those of us who work professionally and are writers, I've written 5 books and I don't know how many articles, probably 50, that got published. And yeah, without peers reading my stuff, I mean, it would mean nothing. So, and some of the people who love you the most will be your harshest critics. Just get ready. Outline, yeah. I know that your 3rd grade teacher taught you how to outline, and you hated it then, you probably hate it now. It makes all the difference, and it saves a whole lot of time. It really tell you whether you're making sense or not from the get-go. Other tips? Yes.
I was thinking about what we learned in elementary school too, the 5-paragraph essay.
Yeah.
And now it's more than 5 paragraphs.
5-part essay, absolutely. And some people say it's a 3-part, say what you're going to say it, then say what you said. But I definitely have these introductions and transitions and closings. They really help the whole thing make sense. Without being redundant, without repeating yourself. There is some creativity to it. That's why creative writing and professional writing go hand in hand. Yes? That's true. Make sure you've got a passionate topic. And even if you're asked to write about something that sounds totally boring or, is some essential thing that you absolutely have to know, you can figure a way to make it interesting. I mean, tie it in somehow with something that you really care about. It really does. Yeah, we definitely do our best writing when our heart is in it as well as our minds. Yes. Absolutely. So she's saying, think about your audience. If it doesn't make sense to the person who wrote it, it's not going to make sense to anybody else. And sometimes reading it out loud helps you to know whether, someone's going to get it or not. So, yes.
When I start, I let it talk.
Say
Say what you mean,
what you mean what you say, and say it well. Yeah, KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. Why use a long word when a short one will do? Why say utilize when use is a perfectly good English word? It's not impressing anybody. And that is a good segue to the next thing I wanted to tell you about. I'm not going to begin to tell you all the resources that are out there. Next slide, please. Oh, but I did have some slides on tips. This one tip I kind of like, which is write more, write even more, write even more than that. When you don't want, write when you don't want to, write when you do want to, write when you have something to say, write when you don't have something to say. Write every day and keep writing. So, next slide, please. These are just three of my favorite. Read excellent writers. Know your professional resources, which I'm about to talk about. And remember, asking for help is a sign of strength, and I'm going to talk about that too. If you're here to learn how to help people and you don't know how to ask for help yourself, well, we have a problem. Being able to receive, being able to recognize when you need help and being a gracious receiver of help is really a foundation for having the audacity to believe that you can actually help somebody else. So we're here to help you, but we can't help you if you don't ask, or if you don't give us some clue that you need help. We're pretty good at detecting things, but we're not that good, and there are a lot of you. So please keep that in mind. Next slide, please. Okay, Dr. Brown mentioned this. I have my copy with me. This is required on almost all your syllabi, and we could talk a long time about why social workers require a psychological style manual, but most social scientists do. And this is, sometimes people think this is the book that teaches you how to do a reference citation, but it's way more than that. It's got tips on how to write simply, how to write concisely. It's got grammar guides. It's got a very important resource on how to use unbiased language. And so we're going to talk in a minute about the referencing. That is a part of it. But this is a really useful tool to have at hand. Next slide, please. You can also use another kind of, in addition to the APA, it's helpful to have whatever they taught you in English grammar or composition. Strunk and Write, this book was first written in 1918 and it's still in print. It's also, I think, available online. The Elements of Style. It's just basic things on, how to compose sentences that sound smooth and clear in English. Next slide, please. There's also some excellent websites. One of which is the Purdue. It's known as the OWL. It stands for Online Writing Lab. Have any of you ever used this at Purdue University? I don't have any students who don't go there. It's got everything you need about writing. The people at Purdue have been most useful in producing this for us. And if you don't use any other websites, I'll give you a day, you probably ought to use that one. And write things and then double check what you're writing. Or practice, every few days, go to the Purdue OWL, learn something, and then double check your writing and see if you're adhering to the kind of principle that they suggest about the grammatical suggestions. The NSW Press also has suggestions for authors. This is in case you want to publish with NSW. But the suggestions that they have are very helpful for student writers as well. And there's one that's absolutely essential because this will affect your grade. It's the Guidelines for Writing About People, and I'm going to take you there for a minute. Under Tools for Authors, Guidelines for Writing About People. When I was a million years ago, when I was learning to be a social worker, the first group I worked with were people who have what is now known as intellectual disability or retardation. And that was not at all unusual for someone to say, that person's a retard. Now today, that's like almost shocking to say. It's such a cruel thing to say. It's like, and what's wrong with saying that? It's labeling. It has developed a demeaning context, although retardation is something no one can help happen. What else does it do to the person?
It reduces the person just to this one characteristic of themselves.
It reduces them to one thing. I mean, there's one thing you learn as a social worker, it's going to be how unbelievably rich we are as human beings, how many different identities we have, how many different capacities, capabilities. That every single human being cannot be minimized down to he's a criminal or he's a juvenile delinquent or whatever the case, or a drunk or you know, these derogatory kinds of things. MSW has guidelines for writing about people that is really important for you to know. Because if you use some of these terms in papers you submit in your class, you may get marked down the first time. If you use them in the second year in my class, you will fail. That is an unacceptable profession, not the whole program, but that is unacceptable professional behavior. It's just, you don't use things that are derogatory. So if you don't learn anything else, learn this. But it's the guidelines, and the link is on your thing. It's guidelines about writing about people. It talks about things like seek and use the preferences of people about whom you're writing. You know, are you going to say black or African American? Well, in different situations, it depends. You know, not all people of dark color in the United States are African American. Some of them are African American. So it's, you know, or some are white Africans. So there's lots of choices to make depending on who you're writing about and what the preferences are. Be as specific as possible, use positive terms. Remember that you're writing about people. We talk about using people first language. Avoid using terms that label people like just the poor or the elderly. Be careful about when you say boy or girl as opposed to young women or young man. When it comes to an age when people don't want to be called boy or girl. Anyway, you can see in this handout there are just great examples.
So senior citizen status?
Well, it depends on the group that you're at, but you can look at the details, but it's going to vary from one group to another, and you will work on this in your classes too. It depends. Some people are okay with that term. So, go back to my slideshow. Just again, I'm not here to teach you this right now, I'm just here to show you some of the resources that you have. So, get back to and then we can finish up here. So NSW, there are also, the University of North Carolina had their school social work, has some excellent resources on writing for social work. I encourage you to go there. It includes one that's called Tips for Writing a Great Paper. And then finally, as I said before, asking for help is a sign of strength. And here at the university, we do have the Centers for Academic Excellence. Our goal is for you to succeed. You've been accepted. We formed a partnership with you. We're going to work hard for you. We know you're going to work hard to develop yourself as a professional. And so these resources exist for you. Now, I will say this. We have a writing center. Last year, the hours were terrible. They were like 10 to 4 on some days or something like that. I haven't seen the hours yet for this year. I know the faculty complained. So you may have to work your schedule in a way that you can get over there. But if your professor says, I suggest you go to the writing center, it's a good idea that you go and go soon. Even if your professor doesn't suggest it, it's a good idea to go. Yes? For the writing center. Naomi, do you know if people who are at distant campuses have access to anything like the writing center? I would get online and ask them that, because it could be that there are similar programs at regional campuses or someplace near the campus you're at that might be able to be helpful. And I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. Well, that ends my presentation. Are there any questions or comments that you'd like to make? I wish you well. I look forward to reading some of your work. Yes. Excuse me. This is unrelated to the workshop, but some of you are registered for my Social Work 732 Communities and Organizations class, and we're told the textbooks aren't there, and we checked it out, and the textbooks are there, although there was a problem with section numbers. So just tell them you're in that class and get it. The books are all there, and they're enough for everybody. You might need to just use a different section number, but there are 2 books, Chris Daltman, Foundations of Communities and Organizations or something like that, and another book on proposal writing. Yeah. Okay. She's saying the same things happened with the 712 textbook. book, that it's there, it's just not there under your section number or under the J. So just keep pushing, because apparently the books are there. Other questions? Yes. Third book for 732? Do you remember?
Every section, every required course has a minimal number of texts. Some may have more, and it's up to the instructor if there are some additional resources. So it may be that there are some additional.
Some of the courses have required books and supplemental books that are optional, so you might need to see the syllabus.
My advanced practice courses have the good fortune ammunition. So, anything else before? Yes. For field, yes. Okay, guys, friendly patient, we'll see you tomorrow, but not till 9.